Hey guys, Matt here from City Physio, and this is Nicola. You've probably seen her floating around. What we're going to do today is have a bit of a chat about the TFCC and how we can actually go and tape it to reinforce the stability of the area. So the TFCC is basically a little ligamentous.
It's so bloody complicated.
Okay, so it's quite large. It's got a fair few things going on. It's ligamentous. It's got a little disky thing, which basically provides stability and cushioning in through the pinky side of the wrist. So there's a couple of different types, and Nicola's going to run through those.
So basically, the reason Matt and I thought we'd talk to you about TFCC injuries is both Matt and I do have a TFCC injury. I have a type 2 and Matt has a type 1. Now, there are basically 9 different types of TFCC injury, but in essence, there's type 1, which falls into traumatic, and type 2, which is more of a degenerative wear and tear style injury. So Matt had a really good injury at football, and you can actually see his TFCC issue. And what we're looking at here is the difference between his pisiform, which is this bone on his hand here, and this bump here. So you can see the difference between those there versus my good wrist, which is nice and close. Those two joints are relatively approximated. So if Matt applies a pressure to those joints, you can actually see his hand return to alignment. So
it's
with
a bit clunky as well.
Yeah, it's really gross.
It doesn't feel very nice.
So when you have a really big TFCC injury, you can actually damage some of the stability of your wrist. So in Matt's wrist, he has a relatively supinated hand on his forearm. So his hand is positioned further into supination than the rest of his arm. So with Matt, you've got positives on kind of everything.
Yeah.
Now the difference between the 4 different types of type 1 basically grades it down to what part of the TFCC was injured. And for Matt, he's also got what we call DRUJ instability, so distal radial on the joint instability, which is the stability on the side of the wrist, hence the really big movement and the big gross clunks. I, on this wrist, have a type 2, which is more degenerative. I am not as unstable, but you can still see that my hand on my left hand is way more supinated than my right hand compared from side to side. So the treatment for me is a little bit of relocation and then a bunch of sort of unloading techniques. But we thought we'd run you through this really cool taping technique that we both really like and works brilliantly for both of us to help sort of stabilize any instability at the end of these hands. There you go, mine is clunked sitting here. You can see I've got my triangle sort of representing where we're going to be taping. And Matt's going to tape my hand so you can actually see this amazing technique that we like to do if you're really unstable and you've got a really big, grotty TFCC. Yeah.
So with instability, you want rigid tape, okay? It's going to stop you moving too far. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with an anchor, okay? You want to anchor around the wrist because what we're trying to achieve is we're trying to get that pisiform bone on the inside of the wrist, outside of the wrist, inside of the wrist anatomically, approximated to that ulnar bone, okay?
So it looks like that effectively. Crunch, there goes mine.
So we can start with a little anchor, all right? And we'll tape around the joint like so, not too tight.
Now if I was doing this on a patient, I would use some underwrap tape, but right now you actually don't need it. It's just more for patient comfort. Yeah, nice sort of tape on the skin, nice and rigid will be great. Not too much stretch.
All right, and then what we're going to do is we're going to have a little fold through here. I'm going to place it over the top of what we call the ulnar styloid, which is that knobbly part on the outside of the wrist there, or on the upper part of the wrist. And what we want is that tab is going to help us create a little bit more pressure or a bit of a mechanical advantage to pull that across with another bit of tape. All right, so what we'll do is we're going to pop this tape onto that tab like so, and then we're going to pull it around a little bit tighter through here. Now I generally recommend you don't go tight all the way around the wrist. We don't want to compress it too much. We want to compress it this side, and then as we come around, we're going to ease off a little bit on that side. All right, so you've got one tab on top, and then we're going to turn the hand over a little bit, and we're going to put another tab on the base of the wrist, which basically looks the same as the original on the other side.
Now the main deal with this tape is I've got pudgy baby arms, so you're going to see a bit of a muffin topping, but don't cut off the blood supply to the hand at the same time. You want it to be firm. You're having a bit of a battle.
Tied myself up there.
You want it to be firm on the wrist, but not enough that you've actually created another issue on another part of the body. Flatten it out. What's going on there?
It's a little bit messy, but it'll do the job.
So you can see we've got a nice sort of flat tab that's going to overlay the wrist.
All right, and the same thing from that side, we're going to tape it from there onto your tab. All right, and then you're going to put a little bit of pressure again on this side, and you're going to compress that piezoform against that ulnar styloid process, like so. All right, so you've got a nice brand new wrist.
So basically now, if you look at the wrist, it's a bit rough on that edge, but it works pretty well. Is you can actually see that this bone here has now come a lot closer to your ulnar styloid, so it doesn't actually have as much bounce as it used to. Whereas if we look at Matt's, which is mine was half of that, you've got a good bit of bounce that happens. Or a big clunk in there too, Matt.
It's nasty.
That just shows you that Matt's got that injury to that area with some instability. So that's what the tape does.